Hey guys, this is Mayor from MMOs.com with another quick weekly news recap of all major MMO news and announcements for the week ending January 22nd, 2018. This is episode number 131 of the recap, and the first bit of news this week comes from NeoWiz regarding Bless. The game released its 2018 development roadmap, which actually wasn't much of a roadmap, but it did include a developer interview where NeoWiz's game director, Jae-hoon Jeon, definitely pronounced that wrong, basically talked about all the issues facing the game and how they plan on addressing them. They're focusing on 4 areas of the game: character growth and progression, optimization, combat, and UI. There's still no firm release date for Blast, but we do know it'll be coming out sometime in 2018, and seeing these developer interviews and updates shows that NeoWiz is serious about getting the game re-released here in the West. I actually enjoyed Blast quite a bit back when I played on the Russian version, but they do need to fix the optimizations. That is the #1 issue facing Blast. It was simply unplayable back in the day, and hopefully when they do release it, those will be ironed out. Next up, some pretty huge news from Camelot Unchained. City State Entertainment, the company behind the game, announced they successfully raised $7.5 million in financing from investors. Mark Jacobs, the studio's founder and CEO, livestreamed the Q&A session regarding this round earlier this week. $7.5 million is a huge chunk of change and will hopefully be enough to get the game to the finish line. The game promises a beta later this year, but expects full release sometime either 2019 or 2020. And counting previous crowdfunding sales and investments, the game has raised a total of $17 million thus far. What I found interesting though was that the $7.5 million investment round just recently was for a minority stake in the company, which values City State Entertainment at over $15 million. This also means that Mark Jacobs remains in control of the company, so he's calling all the shots. The company that invested in Camelot Unchained was the same company that backed Mark Jacobs back in the Mythic Entertainment days, so if you didn't already know, Mark Jacobs is the guy who made Dark Age of Camelot, so he does have a lot of credibility in this space. Up next, Chronicles of Elyria confirmed this last week that they had a round of layoffs after they failed to find a publisher. This comes just 1 week after they announced that they dropped Spatial OS in their game. So the story behind the layoffs is that they doubled their staffing over the last year, but the team size was never intended to be this big without the help of a long-term publisher or investor. And now that they couldn't find an investor or a publisher, they scaled that back, and they're saying now that they can maintain their current expenses with revenues generated from their store. Jeremy Walsh, CEO of Soulbound Studios and head honcho behind Chronicles of Elyria, also complained that publishers weren't willing to take risks on an innovative game like Chronicles of Elyria without changing the game's vision. He basically implied that he could have gotten funding for his game if he had implemented loot boxes, but decided against it. But I'm not exactly buying what he's saying. I think publishers didn't buy into his vision, and they don't think he's capable of making the game he says he's capable of making. And we'll talk more about this in tomorrow's podcast, but it should be a fun discussion then. And speaking of layoffs, Albion Online also confirmed some layoff this last week following the launch of their game earlier in 2017. The game launched with a peak player base of about 150,000 players and has since declined almost every week and is now down to about 25,000 5 months after launch. Interestingly, Albion Online has since disabled the option that allowed players to track the game's player count. Sandbox Interactive, the studio behind the game, said that their staffing levels jumped to 50 to meet the demands of the game's launch, and they've since scaled back and now employ about 31 people. And while these layoffs are definitely not great news, Albion Online is by no means dead. It has a single mega server, so the game doesn't feel dead either. The devs also outlined a detailed roadmap for 2018, so expect a lot of content for the game later this year. Next up, Rift from Tran Worlds announced this week that they're launching a new subscription-based progression service titled Rift Prime to offer players an alternative way to experience the game. I actually think this is a pretty good idea because clearly there are people out there that hate loot boxes and pay-to-win elements, so there may be enough audience out there willing to pay a monthly subscription to avoid all that nonsense. And besides it being a paid server, Rift Prime will be a progression server, so players will experience Rift starting from the base game up until the current expansions and updates. We've seen progression servers actually work really well in other games like Ragnarok Online and EverQuest, for example, so I think they may end up working really well for Rift as well. What's funny is that after they launch these subscription servers, Rift will have gone full circle. The game started as a subscription title, went free to play, and then later made some content buy to play, and now is back to the subscription model, at least for these servers. Keep in mind though, the regular Rift servers will remain free to play as they are. No word on when the Rift Prime paid subscription servers are launching or how much it will cost, but we'll hopefully learn more later this year. Up next, also in Tran Worlds related news, Devilian announced this last week that they'll be shutting down for good on March 5th, 2018. Instead of doing the whole standard we regretfully announced that the game is shutting down spiel, the Devilian people did something a bit funny and clever. The shutdown notice reads as if the game's player base won the game and there's no need for the servers to remain open. It reads basically saying, "You have harnessed your inner strength to vanquish demons throughout Nala, saving it from utter destruction. We thank you for bringing justice and peace back to these ravaged lands. The time of Devilians is drawn to a close, and we hope you carry your laurels and victories to other worlds." So it's actually a really funny way of closing the game. They're saying basically evil's vanquished, no more need to play Devilian, the game is gone. And the announcement really shouldn't be too surprising. The game's player base has been in decline for some time, and actually Bluehole already ceased development for Devilian a while ago, so there's no updates coming out anyway. But yeah, rip Devilian. Next up, Final Fantasy XIV held its live letter number 41 this last week, and they discussed a ton of stuff related to the upcoming patch 4.2, which is still scheduled to launch later this month. There's a new trailer for 4.2, which you can see in the background. The latest raid content, Omega Sigmascape, will be launching as well and will feature old Final Fantasy VI bosses. Doom Train and Kefka will make a return. 6 new housing wards and subdivisions will be added, glamour changes are happening, and there'll be some balance changes as well. Most importantly, of course, there are buffs coming to my favorite class, the Black Mage, so I am mega excited for patch 4.2. Next up, Magic the Gathering Arena released some details on how card unlocks will work in the game. The short version is that it'll basically be the same as Hearthstone and Shadowverse, with one key difference: there won't be any crafting or dust system, and players will instead get more free card packs just by playing the game. The reason behind the no dust / crafting system was that the guys behind the game wanted collecting to be a big part of the game, and they didn't want players to lose cards. But to be honest, I suspect it was more of a monetization decision, because if you try to make a specific deck in Magic or any card game without a dust or crafting system, it's going to be very hard and very frustrating, and you'll end up buying a lot of packs. Still, they did say it'll be very generous with card packs, so that could be a saving grace. I'm personally excited to play this one, as Magic is actually my favorite card game of all time. I've been playing the physical version on and off for well over 14 years now. I know when the open beta is set to begin, but it's been in closed beta for a few weeks or a month or so already, but open beta should hopefully be around the corner. Next, the 4v4 side-scrolling action mode Hyper Universe officially launched this last week and is off to a pretty decent start. The game hit over 2K players this weekend, and finding games have been super quick and easy. Anyone can download and play Hyper Universe either on Steam or the next on launch it for free now. While the side-scrolling action combat is a bit different, I think Hyper Universe will have a lot of trouble maintaining its player base and trying to survive in a hyper-competitive MOBA market. And speaking of hyper-competitive MOBAs, Paragon is having its own issues as well. Epic Games made a lengthy post on the Paragon subreddit talking about where the game stands as is, and it's not looking too good. The game simply isn't attracting enough players to make the project viable, and while it's been an issue for a while now, the huge success of Fortnite is really starting to force Epic's hand. They're basically redirecting resources from Paragon to Fortnite to keep up with the explosive growth. Fortnite has now reached over 40 million players with a peak concurrent player base of over 2 million people. Obviously, Paragon fans were upset with Epic Games' stance, and they felt like it was a betrayal, but given how popular Fortnite is right now, you really can't blame them for focusing their efforts on that game instead of Paragon. It's worth knowing though that Paragon isn't shutting down, but the pace of updates will definitely slow down. Epic Games also ended their community post with a request for feedback on what they should do with the game, which elicited quite a few lengthy replies and detailed suggestions, and we'll see what happens to Paragon, but I don't think it's going to be... I think it'll end up shutting down, but we'll have to wait and see. Next and last bit of news this week is for a game that most of you probably never heard of, but Perpetuum Online, a buy-to-play sci-fi MMORPG, announced that after 7 years of live service, it'll be shutting down on January 25th. What's interesting though is that despite the game's shutdown, it'll remain available on Steam for $4.99 and be playable as a single-player mode. So while the game is dead, it'll live on in a single-player option. So it'll be a single-player MMORPG. How about that, huh? Anyway guys, that's it for MMO News this week. I'll see you guys tomorrow for the podcast. Later guys.